There is a single cup of something sitting in almost every kitchen or backyard fire pit in America right now, and almost nobody realizes it is quietly starving their fig tree of the one nutrient it needs most to load its branches with fruit. It is not a fancy fertilizer. It is not something you have to order online and wait a week for. It is something you have probably thrown away 100 times without a second thought. And once you understand why your fig tree has been growing huge green leaves but barely giving you any fruit, the fix is going to feel almost embarrassingly simple. Stick with me for the next few minutes because I am going to walk you through exactly what this 1 cup is, exactly how much to use, exactly when to use it, and just as importantly, when you should not use it, because doing this wrong can actually do more harm than doing nothing. Real quick, before we go any further, I need to stop you for 1 second. One bad planting mistake, made right now, today, before you even realize it, can cost you years of wasted time, wasted money, and a tree that never gives you the harvest you were hoping for. Most people do not find out until it is already too late to fix. Do not let that be you. Pull out your phone right now, scan the QR code on your screen, and grab the complete guide before you plant, feed, or prune a single thing. Before I tell you what it is, I need you to understand why your fig tree is holding back fruit in the first place, because this is where almost every home gardener gets it backwards. Most people see a fig tree that looks a little thin or a little pale, and their first instinct is to reach for a bag of all-purpose fertilizer loaded with nitrogen. Nitrogen is the nutrient responsible for green leafy growth, and yes, your tree will respond to it. But here is the problem nobody explains clearly enough. When a fig tree gets too much nitrogen relative to everything else, it pours all of its energy into growing bigger leaves and longer branches, and it treats fruit production as an afterthought. You end up with a lush, beautiful, jungle-like tree that produces a small handful of figs, or sometimes almost none at all. Commercial growers have known this for decades. The nutrient that actually controls flowering, fruit set, fruit size, and fruit sweetness in a fig tree is potassium. Potassium is the nutrient that tells the tree it is safe to invest energy into fruit instead of just leaves. Figs, along with strawberries, tomatoes, and potatoes, are considered heavy potassium consumers, meaning they pull a disproportionate amount of this nutrient out of the soil compared to other nutrients, and if the soil around your tree is not replenished with potassium, your tree will keep growing green and giving you less and less fruit every single season. So here is the reveal. The 1 cup that can transform your fig tree is a cup of wood ash, steeped into what old-time growers used to call ash tea and applied around the base of the tree. Wood ash, the leftover material from burning untreated wood in a fireplace, fire pit, or wood stove, is one of the richest free sources of potassium available to a home gardener. It typically contains somewhere around 3% potassium, along with meaningful amounts of calcium, and it has been used by farmers and orchard keepers for generations, long before synthetic fertilizers existed, specifically to push fruiting trees like figs into heavier production. The reason almost nobody talks about this today is simple. It is free. It is not something a garden center can put a colorful label on and sell you for $20 a bag. It is sitting in a pile of ash you already created and probably already dumped in the trash. Here is exactly how to use it. Take 1 cup of wood ash from untreated, unpainted wood, meaning no charcoal briquettes, no treated lumber, and no ash from paper or cardboard, and dissolve it into about 1 gallon of water. Let it sit and steep for about 24 hours, stirring occasionally, similar to how you would steep a tea bag, except on a much larger scale. Once it has steeped, pour the liquid slowly around the drip line of your fig tree, which is the imaginary circle on the ground directly beneath the outer edge of the branches, not right against the trunk. This is important because most of a tree's active feeder roots are not clustered at the trunk, they are spread out at the edge of the canopy, and feeding directly against the trunk wastes the nutrients and can even encourage rot at the base of the tree. Do this once in early spring, right as new growth is starting to emerge, and if you want a second application, do it again in early summer before the fruit begins to ripen, then stop. You do not need to repeat this every week, and you should never dump dry wood ash directly and heavily onto the soil without diluting it first, because concentrated ash is highly alkaline and can spike your soil pH if it is over-applied, which creates a whole new set of problems, including locking out other nutrients your tree needs. This brings me to the most important warning in this entire video, and I want you to actually pay attention to this part instead of skipping ahead, because this is exactly where people ruin a perfectly healthy tree while trying to help it. Wood ash raises soil pH because it is alkaline, similar to garden lime. Fig trees generally prefer soil that sits somewhere in the neutral range, and if your soil is already naturally alkaline, which is common in many regions with limestone-based soil or hard water, adding wood ash repeatedly over multiple seasons can push the pH too high. When soil pH climbs too high, the tree actually becomes less able to absorb iron and other micronutrients, even though those nutrients are still physically present in the soil. And you will start to see the classic warning sign of yellowing leaves with green veins, which confuses a lot of gardeners because it looks exactly like a nitrogen deficiency when it is actually the opposite problem entirely. The fix here is not complicated, it just requires a little patience. Before you start any wood ash routine, and definitely before you make it a repeated seasonal habit, it is worth doing a simple soil pH test, which you can buy cheaply at almost any garden center or hardware store. If your soil already reads neutral to alkaline, use wood ash sparingly, maybe once a year at most, or skip it entirely and choose a different potassium source instead. If your soil reads acidic, which is common in regions with heavy rainfall or naturally sandy soil, wood ash becomes an even better fit because it corrects two problems at once: low potassium and overly acidic soil in a single free application. Now, wood ash is not the only path to more figs, and if your soil situation makes ash a bad fit for you, I want to make sure you are not left without options, because the actual goal here is potassium, and there is more than one door that leads to the same room. Potassium sulfate is a mineral supplement many experienced fig growers dissolve slowly into their watering routine during the winter dormant season, specifically because it delivers potassium without the alkalinity spike that comes with wood ash. If you would rather stay fully organic and avoid any mined mineral supplement entirely, kelp meal is another excellent potassium source that many growers fold into their fertilizing routine, and it comes with the added benefit of trace micronutrients that support overall tree resilience against drought and cold snaps, which matters a lot for fig trees, since they are often grown slightly outside their ideal climate zone by adventurous backyard gardeners, pushing the boundaries of what should technically survive in their yard. While we are talking about nutrients, I want to clear up the confusion around Epsom salt, because you have probably seen at least one gardening video claiming Epsom salt is some kind of miracle cure for fruit trees, and the truth is a little more nuanced than that. Epsom salt is magnesium sulfate, and magnesium plays a real legitimate role in a plant's ability to produce chlorophyll, the pigment responsible for photosynthesis. If your fig tree is genuinely deficient in magnesium, which often shows up as yellowing between the veins on older, lower leaves while the veins themselves stay green, then a small application of Epsom salt, roughly 1 teaspoon dissolved per gallon of water, applied about once a month during the growing season, can absolutely help correct that specific problem. But here is the honest, research-backed reality that most gardening content conveniently leaves out. If your tree is not actually magnesium deficient, dumping Epsom salt on it will not magically boost your fruit yield, and several university extension programs have pointed out that many of the miracle claims around Epsom salt for fruit trees are anecdotal, rather than proven in controlled studies. Overusing it can also throw off the balance of other nutrients your tree needs, since Epsom salt is still, at the end of the day, a concentrated mineral salt. The smart approach is to only reach for Epsom salt when you actually see the specific yellowing pattern that points to a magnesium problem, rather than treating it as an automatic monthly ritual regardless of what your tree is actually telling you. Listen closely for a second, because this matters more than you think. Every season you wait and just guess your way through fertilizing, you risk feeding your tree the wrong nutrient at the wrong time, and slowly watching your harvest shrink while you keep spending money replacing trees that never had to die in the first place. Stop guessing right now. Grab your phone, scan the QR code on your screen, and get the complete guide before you go any further. Let us talk about the full picture of what your fig tree actually needs throughout the year, because potassium alone will not save a tree that is missing everything else. In early spring, right as the buds begin to swell and the first hint of new leaves appears, this is your primary fertilizing window. Many experienced growers apply a balanced fertilizer at this point, something with roughly equal parts nitrogen, phosphorus, and potassium, often labeled as 10-10-10 on the packaging, to give the tree a broad foundation of nutrients as it wakes up from dormancy. This is also the ideal moment for that first wood ash tea application if your soil test supports using it. As the season moves into late spring and early summer, while the tree is setting its fruit, this is when the potassium boost matters most, because this is the exact window where the tree is deciding how much energy to commit toward developing the fruit that is already forming versus continuing to push out more leafy growth. A well-timed potassium application here can be the difference between a tree that abandons half its baby figs and one that carries them all the way to ripeness. By the time you reach midsummer, the equation changes again. If you live somewhere with cold winters, meaning growing zone 7 or colder, you actually want to stop fertilizing by around mid-July, and if you are in zone 6 or colder, stop even earlier, closer to the start of July. The reason for this cutoff is not about the current season's fruit at all. It is about protecting the tree from itself. Fertilizer, especially anything with meaningful nitrogen content, encourages soft, tender new growth, and if that new growth is still soft and actively growing when the first frost hits in autumn, that growth gets damaged or killed outright, which weakens the entire tree heading into winter and can set back next year's fruiting before the season has even started. Growers in warmer zones, roughly zone 8 through 10, have more flexibility and can continue light feeding a bit later into the season since frost risk is lower or non-existent. Watering deserves its own moment here too, because fertilizer without proper water management is like pouring gasoline into an engine with no oil. Fig trees actually prefer a slightly dry rhythm rather than constantly soggy soil, but they are also extremely sensitive to inconsistent watering once fruit has started to form. If a fig tree goes through a stretch of dry soil and then suddenly gets a heavy watering, whether from rain or from you overcompensating with a hose, the fruit can absorb water too quickly and literally split open before it has finished ripening. The fix is deep, consistent watering on a predictable schedule rather than occasional dramatic soakings. Established trees in the ground typically do well with a deep watering once or twice a week during hot, dry stretches, while container-grown fig trees, which dry out much faster because their roots are confined to a small volume of soil, often need checking every day or two during peak summer heat. Sunlight is another factor that people underestimate constantly. Fig trees are sun-hungry plants that evolved in Mediterranean climates with long, intense, direct sunlight, and a tree tucked into partial shade will survive, grow leaves, and even look perfectly healthy, while producing a fraction of the fruit it is capable of. If your fig tree has been underperforming, and you have been focused entirely on soil and fertilizer, take a step back and honestly evaluate how much direct sun it is actually getting throughout the day. 6 to 8 hours of direct sunlight is the target most experienced growers aim for. And if your tree is planted somewhere that only gets 4 or 5 hours because of a building, fence, or larger tree, casting a shadow for part of the day, no amount of wood ash tea is going to fully compensate for that missing sunlight. Pruning is the last major piece of this puzzle, and it connects directly back to the fruiting conversation from earlier. Figs typically form their main crop on new growth from the current season, which means the more healthy new growth you encourage through proper pruning, the more potential fruiting sites your tree creates. Late winter, while the tree is still fully dormant and before any new buds have started swelling, is the ideal window to prune out dead, damaged, or overly crowded branches, opening up the canopy so that sunlight and airflow can reach the interior of the tree rather than just the outer edges. A tree that is overcrowded in the middle will often show excellent fruit around the outside while producing almost nothing in the shaded interior branches, and simply thinning out. That congestion can noticeably increase your total harvest the following season without adding a single additional nutrient. If you are growing your fig tree in a container rather than directly in the ground, a few of these rules shift slightly, and it is worth addressing separately because container growing has genuinely become one of the most popular ways people grow figs, especially in colder climates where the tree needs to be moved indoors or into a garage for winter protection. Container soil depletes its nutrient reserves much faster than ground soil because there is a limited volume of soil and constant watering gradually washes nutrients out through the drainage holes. This means container-grown fig trees generally need more frequent, lighter feeding compared to their in-ground counterparts, rather than large, infrequent applications. A diluted liquid feed every few weeks during the active growing season tends to work better for potted figs than a single heavy dose of granular fertilizer. And when it comes to wood ash specifically, container trees need an even more cautious approach, since the confined soil volume means pH shifts happen faster and are harder to correct once they occur. If you are growing in containers, consider using a much smaller, more diluted ash tea application, or lean more heavily on potassium sulfate or kelp meal instead, since both give you finer control over exactly how much you are delivering to a small volume of soil. I also want to address a few other kitchen scrap remedies you have probably seen floating around gardening videos and social media, because some of them genuinely help and others are mostly folklore that sounds good but does not hold up well under scrutiny. Crushed eggshells, worked gently into the soil around the base of the tree, provide a slow-release source of calcium, along with smaller amounts of phosphorus and magnesium, and calcium plays a role in healthy cell wall development throughout the tree, including in the fruit itself. This is a legitimately useful, low-risk addition, though it acts slowly since eggshells take time to break down, so do not expect a fast dramatic result the way you might see something like a liquid feed. Banana peels, another popular kitchen scrap remedy, do contain potassium, but nowhere near the concentration found in wood ash, and the amount of usable potassium that actually makes it into the soil from a few chopped banana peels is fairly modest compared to what people online tend to imply. It is not harmful to add them to a compost pile that eventually feeds your fig tree, but treating banana peels as a standalone miracle fix is overselling what they can realistically deliver. Coffee grounds are the one I want to caution you on most directly. Coffee grounds are mildly acidic and do contain some nitrogen, but heavy, undiluted application directly against the base of a fig tree can create an overly acidic pocket of soil right where the feeder roots are trying to absorb nutrients, and this is particularly risky for a young or already stressed tree. If you want to use coffee grounds at all, work them thinly into compost first, rather than applying them directly and heavily around the trunk. Let me bring this all together into a single, simple, seasonal rhythm you can actually follow without overthinking it every week. In early spring, as new growth emerges, apply a balanced fertilizer to give your tree a broad nutritional foundation. And if your soil test shows neutral to acidic conditions, this is also your window for the first wood ash tea application around the drip line. A few weeks later, as the tree moves into active fruit set through late spring and early summer, this is your key potassium moment, whether that comes from a second lighter wood ash application, a dose of potassium sulfate, or kelp meal, depending on what fits your soil and your comfort level. Throughout the growing season, watch your leaves closely, because they are constantly communicating with you. Yellowing between the veins on older leaves signals a possible magnesium shortage, worth addressing with a careful, moderate Epsom salt application. General pale, weak-looking foliage across the whole tree often points to a nitrogen shortfall instead. Lush, oversized, overly green leaves paired with very little actual fruit is your signal to back off nitrogen and lean harder into potassium. By midsummer, stop fertilizing entirely if you are in a colder growing zone, allowing the tree to naturally slow down and harden off before the weather turns. In late winter, while everything is still dormant, prune out dead wood and overcrowded interior branches to set the stage for strong new growth once spring arrives again. One more piece of this puzzle that ties everything together is mulch. Because mulch determines how well any of these nutrients actually stay in place long enough for your tree to use them. A 3 to 4 inch layer of organic mulch, such as wood chips, straw, or shredded leaves, spread out under the canopy from a few inches away from the trunk out to the drip line, does far more than just make the bed look tidy. It regulates soil temperature, keeping roots cooler during brutal summer heat and better insulated during unexpected cold snaps. It slows down evaporation, which means the deep watering schedule we talked about earlier actually holds moisture longer instead of drying out within a day. And as organic mulch slowly breaks down over the season, it contributes a gentle, steady trickle of additional nutrients back into the soil, essentially working as a second, background layer of feeding that supports whatever fertilizing routine you are already running. Just remember to keep mulch pulled back slightly from direct contact with the trunk itself, because mulch piled directly against the bark traps moisture against the tree and can invite rot or unwanted pests, undoing a lot of the good the mulch is otherwise doing. It is also worth taking a moment to talk about the mistakes that quietly sabotage fig trees year after year, because avoiding these is sometimes more valuable than adding any new feeding routine at all. The most common mistake is impatience, applying fertilizer or wood ash repeatedly within the same few weeks, because the tree does not seem to be responding fast enough, when in reality these nutrients take time to work into the soil and get absorbed by the root system. A second common mistake is treating every fig tree the same regardless of age. A young fig tree in its first or second year in the ground is still establishing its root system, and heavy feeding at this stage can actually push the tree to prioritize top growth over root development, leaving it less stable and less drought tolerant later on. Young trees generally do better with lighter, more diluted feeding until they are a few years established. A third mistake is ignoring the difference between a tree that is underperforming because of nutrients and a tree that is underperforming because of stress from something else entirely. Whether that is root-bound conditions in a container that has been outgrown, competing weeds and grass stealing water and nutrients from directly around the base, or simply a tree that was planted somewhere with poor drainage where the roots are sitting in water they cannot use properly. No amount of wood ash tea will fix a drainage problem, and recognizing which category your tree actually falls into before reaching for any supplement will save you a lot of wasted effort and wasted seasons. The bigger lesson buried inside all of this is something that applies far beyond just fig trees. Most home gardeners assume more fertilizer automatically means more fruit, and that assumption is exactly what leads to giant leafy trees that barely produce anything worth harvesting. The real secret was never about feeding your tree more. It was about feeding it the right nutrient at the right moment in its yearly cycle. Understanding that a tree loaded with nitrogen and starved of potassium will always prioritize leaves over fruit, and that something as ordinary and free as a cup of wood ash, used carefully and with a little respect for your specific soil conditions, can shift that balance back in favor of the harvest you actually planted the tree for in the first place. Hey, before you close this video, listen carefully, because this is the part people regret ignoring the most. Do not wait years only to realize you have been feeding your tree the wrong thing at the wrong time and wasted entire seasons you can never get back. The fix takes 30 seconds. Grab your phone right now, scan the QR code on your screen, and get the complete guide today before you forget. If this video helped you understand your fig tree a little better, there is a lot more where this came from. Because most of what actually works in a garden is quiet, unglamorous, and rarely gets the attention it deserves compared to flashy miracle products. Make sure you are subscribed so you catch the next one, and if you try the wood ash tea method this season, pay close attention to how your tree responds over the following few weeks, because that feedback is the best teacher you will ever have in the garden. Thanks for watching, and I will see you in the next one.